Unsurprisingly, and as always, there are lots and lots of different attitudes to sex outside of marriage and before marriage. So sex outside of marriage could refer to either having sex before you get married, or it could refer to adultery. All religious people will tend to say that adultery is wrong. However, sex before marriage is a different matter. So make sure that when you're looking at the question, you consider what it's actually asking you about. Is it asking you about sex outside of marriage in general, or is it asking you about sex before marriage on its own? Within Islam, there are many countries that still practice a very strict interpretation of Sharia or Islamic law. And it's been in the news a lot recently for punishing adultery, that is cheating, by either stoning or severe whipping. Women across the world still face being whipped or even stoned then, as well as some men, if they commit adultery. While this is condemned by many Muslims, sex outside of marriage is still considered a sin by all official Muslim leaders because it is forbidden in the Quran. For this reason, girls and boys are often kept relatively separate, and girls often wear a headscarf to maintain modesty. This can be traced back to the idea that the primary purpose of sex is to have children or to procreate, and that Muslims are expected to get married as the Prophet Muhammad did, and because the family is so important, should try not to do anything that could cause harm to it. As Islam has reached the West, however, attitudes are starting to change among Muslim populations. Many women do not wear headscarves and no longer have arranged marriages. Polygamy, where men marry more than one wife, is not allowed under UK law, and some Muslims are even starting to cohabit and really change some of the previously held traditions. Similarly, even though the Bible suggests the same strict punishments for adultery, and St. Paul specifically said that women should wear a headscarf, Christians today do not follow a lot of these rules. Because marriage, which is an important sacrament or rite of passage, is said to symbolise the union between Jesus and the Church, and notice that I'm spelling it with a capital letter, which means I'm referring to, it's not a very good drawing, the people versus the building. Because marriage then is seen as an important union between Jesus and his church, it should be taken seriously, and Christian ideas about marriage reflect this. They would argue then that it is a sacrament, which means it's an outward sign of an inner blessing, and is very, very important. The Church of England actually accept cohabitation, which is where people live together without being married. In a report called Something to Celebrate, they argued that as long as it was a step before marriage, then it would be acceptable to get married at the end, but see how it goes in advance by living together. Adultery, so sex outside of marriage when you're actually already married, is prohibited in the Ten Commandments. However, some Christians go further and argue that you shouldn't have sex before you get married either. So, whilst all Christians would argue that you should not be promiscuous, i.e. have casual sexual relationships, some evangelical Christians actually promote abstinence. And you might see some of these Christians wearing purity rings or abstinence rings to show that they will not be having sex before they get married. Many people, whether religious or not, argue that people should wait before having sex. They would argue that having sex before marriage could lead to a baby that doesn't have a stable home, and that being promiscuous leaves you open to more STDs or sexually transmitted diseases. Other people argue that times have changed and that people have the right to have sex if they want to. For some, sex is an opportunity to get to know a partner before marriage and can help make a relationship stronger, arguably, so long as it's taken seriously. For your exam then, you need to know about Muslim and Christian attitudes to sex outside of marriage and be able to evaluate ideas on both sides of the debate. Do you think sex outside of marriage is acceptable? Why? And why might some people argue that some types of sex outside of marriage are wrong, but others are not?